We're here talking about the election. It's coming up in November, getting really close to the election. So you're running for your 6th term, correct?
Right.
So if you are reelected, kind of what are your goals going into this 6th term? Like what do you see as far as opportunity there and for accomplishments?
Well, the first thing we've got to do is address the whole issue of inflation and what it's done to people. There are literally people who are living paycheck to paycheck. They can't afford their groceries and their household power bills, putting gas in their cars, and it's really been a struggle. As a matter of fact, almost 70% of the people who earn $100,000 a year are living paycheck to paycheck, and that's going to be our first priority. And I think part of that will be attacking the regulations that have been imposed over the last 4 years by the current administration. And what I've shared with people about this, and I tend to nerd out on people, I chair the policy committee, is that you know what your taxes are. The payroll taxes, personal income taxes, are running about $2.18 trillion a year. But what you don't see are those hidden taxes that come in the form of regulations. And under Trump, we cut regulatory costs by over $200 billion. That saved households somewhere around $10,800. Under Biden, they've increased regulations by $2.12 trillion, almost as much as the personal income tax. And that comes out to about $47,000 per household that you don't see. It just shows up in the price of a box of cereal or in a gallon of gas or on your power bill because we've so over-regulated the economy. And I think that's going to be one of the very first things that we address.
Are there any other suggestions for cutting down, the costs that everyday Americans and Alabamians see?
Absolutely. The other thing that I've told people repeatedly, and I've been saying this for years, is the most inflationary commodity in the economy is energy cost. And there's an energy cost in everything that you use, whether it's a product or a service. It's in the cost of the food you eat, it's in the clothes you wear, it's in the water you use, it's in everything. And again, going back to what happened when this administration began, they immediately shut down leases on federal lands, which caused energy futures to go up. They stopped the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline, which would have brought in over 835,000 barrels per day of Canadian oil, which would have helped stabilize the market. But they've also put a freeze on the construction of any new liquefied natural gas facilities. And American natural gas is the cleanest gas in the world. It's also enormously abundant. And not only have we put a freeze on building any additional LNG facilities, we put a freeze on increasing exports to Europe, which has really put our allies in a bind because they don't want to buy gas from Russia. So if we get in, we open up our energy resources. We've also got to deal with critical minerals and rare earth elements. We're almost totally dependent on China for these things, and particularly for the processing and refining of these elements, and we have them here. And we've got to have a clear head about this, because if we get into a conflict with China and get cut off from those, your cell phone cost is going to explode. Even the panels in your washing machines or your microwaves, our military depends on these things, so we've got to address that as well.
Yes, sir. And another big topic of conversation this election cycle is protecting in vitro fertilization. Do you think that there needs to be federal action in order to protect IVF?
I think we're going to have to address it at some point. My wife and I have personal experience with that. So I look at it a little bit differently. We've got friends that have born children that way. And but we need to have some safeguards as well. And one of the interesting things is the law that Louisiana has is similar to the law that they have in Italy, where they limit the number of eggs that can be extracted and fertilized. But I think we need to have a sensible approach to this. There are a lot of families that want children, can't have children, and are really hurting. And I think we want to have a sensible approach to it.
Yes, sir. And that would be at the federal level, or do you think it should stay with the states to decide?
Well, I'm typically in favor of letting the states decide these things themselves, but I think we need to address some of this at the federal level. I don't want to see people lose access to it, but again, I want it done in a way that is moral, but also taking into account where people are in their life, and I think we can.
And your congressional district surrounds the city of Birmingham. The city of Birmingham has had some issues with homicides. Violent crime overall is down, but homicide rates are up. Of course, the tragic mass shooting that happened during September, and then another one earlier this year. Do you think that there needs to be some action at the federal level to help with these types of incidents that we're seeing?
I think what we have in terms of inner city violence is more a reflection of the breakdown of the family, the lack of access to quality education. Again, my wife and I have for years been contributing to a couple of inner city private schools, Banks Academy and Cornerstone. But we've got to take seriously prosecuting crime. We can't say do what's happened in a lot of places where they just don't even prosecute. They don't even have bond form anymore, and it's really caused us to see a crime wave that's not. And by the way, when the FBI they just adjusted those stats, violent crime is up. Not just homicide, but across the board, violent crime is up. And what we've done is we've literally handcuffed our own police. And you look at the city of Birmingham, there are hundreds of officers short. That's true all across the country. But I think we've got to get serious about prosecuting these crimes. But at the same time, I think we've got to give families, particularly inner city families, a better alternative for getting their kids educated, get them out of a climate of violence, and growing up with a sense that they can't make anything of themselves. Now, I grew up in a small town. We didn't deal with violence, but my dad had about an 8th grade education, but they made sure I finished high school, and I'm the first person in my family to go to college, and it changed everything. My brothers and my sister all went to school. My mom had finished high school, and my dad only, like I said, had an 8th grade education, but my mom finished high school, and she had always wanted to be a nurse, and when the 3 older of us got out of the house, she went back to school and got a nursing degree. And I've seen this work personally, and I think it could work if we're really dedicated to it. And what concerns me is that we just kind of shrug our shoulders and move on to the next one.
Yes, sir. Some of the city leaders have called for gun reform. Do you think that would be helpful to preventing incidents like we've seen in Birmingham?
Won't do a thing. Murder's already illegal, but it hadn't stopped the killing. So if you think you're going to ban guns and stop people with ill intent from finding a gun illegally and killing somebody, you're dead wrong. We've got to address the underlying causes of this. What would make someone so desperate that and so callous that they'd want to go out and take someone's life? I don't think banning guns or passing gun control laws will do anything. Illinois got some of the most stringent gun control laws in the country, and parts of Chicago is virtually a war zone.
Yes, sir. What's your stance on immigration reform? Do we need immigration reform right now?
Absolutely, but we're not dealing with a problem with immigration. We're dealing with a problem of migration and an open border. Our borders are not secure. They intentionally the Biden-Harris administration intentionally opened the border. I've been down there multiple times, and the last time was in last January, and it's a situation where it's a national security issue now. I was told that the cartels charge people less who turn themselves in to the Border Patrol than they do the people who don't want to be picked up. There's almost 2 million guideways, and they estimate close to another 1,800,000 to another million that we didn't even see them cross. And it's a huge problem. While I was there were 6 guys waded across the river, across this little canal, and up the bank, climbed up the bank where I was. I think they thought I was Border Patrol. They were all late teens, early 20s, and they were from Venezuela and Honduras. They turned themselves in. But that same day, I talked to a rancher who had told me from December 28th to January 4th, he had had the same fence cut 77 times. Those were the guideways. So I think that that's the first thing we have to address is we have got to secure our border. And this discussion from the left and from the Biden-Harris administration about this is about immigration, it really isn't.
What can Congress do in order to secure the border?
Well, we've already passed the Secure the Border Act. It's one of the first 2 bills we passed in this current Congress. Provided the funding we needed to complete the wall, would have added additional Border Patrol agents, would have provided technology, which is a big part of securing your border. I think we need to add canine units to the mix. And it's important not only to prevent people from crossing the border illegally, but to interdict the flow of fentanyl that's coming into the country. We had over 100,000 people die last year from drug overdoses, and over half of them were fentanyl poisonings. That's not a drug overdose, that's a poisoning.
Yes, sir. What's your stance on the ongoing wars between Russia and Ukraine and Israel and Hamas?
Well, this is going to sound partisan, but I try not to make partisan statements, but I can tell you that the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan and just basically turning the country over to the Taliban weakened us in the eyes of our enemies and weakened us in the eyes of our allies. I do not believe Putin would have invaded Ukraine had we not surrendered Afghanistan to the Taliban, including turning over billions of dollars worth of military equipment. And I tend to think that same thing might be true about the Hamas attack on October 7th of last year. This administration has seriously destabilized situations in terms of international conflict. When Trump left office, the Iranians had about $4 billion in reserve. They were broke. The policies of the Trump administration to crack down on Iran, we had our allies on board, they were working. Now the Iranians have been able to sell their oil and gas again. They've built up enormous reserves of cash and other materials that they need, because I think that they're anticipating that Trump will be reelected, and they want to build up a reserve to last them these 4 years. I never in my wildest dreams thought I would see us divided over Israel. But now you've got a presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, refusing to align herself with Israel. And it just shows how much things have changed just in a few years. And I think one of the things that surprises people is I had breakfast with a ambassador from Europe, one of the European countries. I won't say which country it was. But in the discussion, I asked, well, what do you think of Trump? And we'd been talking about infrastructure, and this is a country that has great highways and bridges, and the response was, we like him. I said, well, why is that? And the response was, because we know when he says something, he'll do it. And what I try to tell people is that there is no substitute for certainty in foreign policy. What gets you in trouble is when people see you as weak or uncertain about your own positions. They'll take advantage of that. History is not over. There are nation states out there that will do us harm. They will do our allies harm. And we have to have policies that are clear and communicated clearly. And I'm working on something that I hope in the next Trump administration we'll be able to implement, a Western Hemisphere alliance that really reinforces our relationships not only with our European allies, but in Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa, and do this as a soft power alternative to China and Iran and Russia. We don't have to be provocative. We just have to be smart, and we haven't been smart.